Of all the creatures that walk this earth, there's something about horses that captures the human heart in a way few others can. Their grace, their strength, and that glint of quiet determination in their eyes make them symbols of freedom itself. Yet, for centuries, people have tried to break that spirit, to bend these majestic beings into something tame and submissive. Some horses comply. Others fight back. But every now and then, a story comes along that makes you question everything you thought you knew about resilience, loyalty, and the bond between humans and animals. It started in a quiet, wind-swept valley, where a single ranch stood against the vastness of the horizon. The ranch had been there for generations, its weathered fences and creaking barn doors telling stories of hard winters and long, sun-baked summers. The people who lived there were known for their skill in training even the most difficult horses. But this time, they faced a challenge unlike any they had ever known. The horse arrived one gray morning, its coat dark as storm clouds and its eyes restless, scanning every movement, every sound, like it was ready to bolt at the slightest provocation. No one knew much about where it had come from, only that it had been purchased at an auction where the air was heavy with desperation and the cries of mistreated animals. Horses like this were often deemed lost causes, too wild, too damaged to ever trust a human hand again. From the moment the horse stepped off the trailer, it was clear it was different. It didn't rear or thrash like some of the others, but there was something unsettling about its stillness. Its ears flicked back and forth, catching every whisper of wind, every cautious step of the people around it. The ranchers tried to lead it into the corral, but the horse planted its hooves firmly in the dirt, as if daring anyone to try and move it. The harder they pulled, the more it resisted, until finally, someone muttered under their breath, "This one's got a broken spirit." At first glance, that might have seemed true. The horse carried itself with a heaviness, like it was dragging years of unseen weight behind it. But anyone who looked closer could see that its spirit wasn't broken, it was guarded, like a flame that had been shielded from too many storms. And though it seemed to shrink away from touch, there was fire in its eyes, a defiance that refused to be extinguished. The ranch hands began their work, starting slow, trying to gain the horse's trust. Days turned into weeks, but progress was painfully slow. The horse wouldn't let anyone near it. It flinched at even the gentlest of gestures, its body rigid with tension. They tried all the usual methods: soft voices, patience, even treats, but nothing seemed to reach the horse. It was as if it had locked itself in a world no human could enter. Word spread about the horse that wouldn't be tamed, and soon, it wasn't just the ranch hands who came to watch. Neighbors, friends, even strangers from the nearby town began to gather at the fences, curious about this mysterious animal. They whispered stories about where it might have come from. Some said it had been abandoned by a traveling circus. Others claimed it was a wild Mustang captured straight from the mountains. Whatever the truth was, one thing was certain: this horse carried scars, both visible and hidden, and it wasn't about to let anyone forget it. Despite the setbacks, the ranch owner refused to give up. There was something about this horse, a glimmer of something unspoken, that made them believe it wasn't beyond saving. But the days grew colder, and the patience of the ranch hands began to wear thin. One by one, they started to call it a lost cause. Some horses, they said, just can't be saved. But then something unexpected happened. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned shades of gold and lavender, a small child wandered into the corral. No one saw them go in. The ranch hands were too busy finishing their work, their thoughts far from the horse that had defied them for so long. But the child, unaware of the danger, walked straight up to the horse. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The horse's ears twitched, its muscles tensed, and it turned its head sharply toward the tiny figure standing before it. The ranch hands shouted, rushing toward the corral, fear gripping their hearts. But before they could reach the child, something extraordinary happened. The horse didn't rear. It didn't bolt. Instead, it stood perfectly still, its dark eyes locked on the child. Slowly, Hesitantly, the child reached out a hand. And then, to the astonishment of everyone watching, the horse lowered its head, letting the small fingers brush against its muzzle. That single moment sent shockwaves through the ranch. For weeks, the horse had refused to let anyone near it, but here it was, standing calm and quiet under the touch of a child who didn't even know the meaning of fear. It was as if something unspoken had passed between them, a connection beyond words, beyond logic. And from that moment on, everything began to change. But how had the child succeeded where so many others had failed? What had they seen in the horse that no one else could? And what would it take to unravel the secrets of this animal's past, to truly understand the pain and resilience hidden behind its guarded eyes? As the days unfolded, the answers would prove more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined, leading to a moment that would leave the entire ranch forever changed. But that's a story for the next chapter. The ranch was abuzz after that moment in the corral. No one could explain what had just happened, but it was impossible to ignore. The horse, the same one that had avoided every touch and flinched at every sound, had allowed a child to get close. It wasn't just surprising, it was unthinkable. The ranch hands exchanged hushed conversations over their morning coffee, shaking their heads as if they had all dreamed the same impossible scene. But the truth was right there, grazing in the corral, calm as the breeze rolling through the valley. The child, still blissfully unaware of the chaos they had caused, wandered out to the corral again the next day. This time, every eye on the ranch was watching. No one stopped them, they were too curious to see what would happen. The horse stood in the far corner of the enclosure, its tail flicking lazily, its ears twitching at the sound of approaching footsteps. But when the child slipped through the wooden rails, it didn't move away. Instead, it turned its head, its dark eyes fixed on the tiny figure making their way toward it. There was something almost hypnotic about the way the child moved, slow, steady, without hesitation. It wasn't the careful, calculated approach of the ranch hands. It was simple, instinctive, like they somehow understood what the horse needed without ever having been told. They stopped just a few feet away and waited, their small hands hanging loosely at their sides. The horse took a step forward, then another, and lowered its head. The child reached out, fingers brushing against its muzzle, and for the second time, the horse stood perfectly still. The ranch owner, standing at the edge of the fence, let out a long breath they hadn't realized they were holding. They muttered under their breath. It was like watching a miracle unfold, something so pure and unexplainable that it sent a shiver down their spine. But as much as the moment inspired awe, it also raised questions. Why this child? Why now? And why was the horse still so distrustful of everyone else? The ranch hands weren't the only ones curious. The neighbors who had come to watch the horse's earlier standoff with the trainers returned, this time with more people in tow. Soon, the corral became the center of attention, drawing onlookers from miles around. They leaned against the fences, swapping theories and spinning stories, each more elaborate than the last. Some said the child had a special gift, a kind of sixth sense that allowed them to communicate with animals. Others believed the horse had recognized something in the child's innocence, maybe, or kindness, and decided it could finally let its guard down. But the child wasn't thinking about any of that. To them, the horse wasn't a mystery to be solved or a problem to be fixed. It was just a horse. A big, beautiful creature with eyes that seemed to see right through you and a presence that felt like standing in the middle of a thunderstorm. They didn't know why the horse let them get close, and they didn't care. All they knew was that it felt right, like the most natural thing in the world. Still, not everyone was convinced. Some of the ranch hands grumbled about how the child's visits were a distraction, a fluke that didn't change the fact that the horse was untrainable. What good is a horse that only listens to a kid? One of them muttered, shaking their head. Others worried about safety, insisting that the child's closeness to such a volatile animal was a disaster waiting to happen. But the ranch owner wasn't ready to give up on the horse just yet. If anything, The child's connection had sparked a new determination in them, a sense that maybe, just maybe, this horse wasn't a lost cause after all. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between the child and the horse only grew stronger. The child would spend hours in the corral, sitting quietly in the grass while the horse grazed nearby. Sometimes they'd hum a tune under their breath, a soft, lilting melody that seemed to soothe the horse in a way no voice or touch ever had. And every now and then the horse would lower its head, nudging the child's shoulder with its nose, as if to say, "I'm here. I trust you." But the progress was slow, and the horse's wariness of adults didn't waver. Whenever one of the ranch hands tried to approach, it would retreat to the far end of the enclosure, its body tense, its eyes filled with suspicion. It was like watching a door slammed shut, one that only the child had the key to open. And the ranch hands, no matter how skilled or patient, were left standing on the outside, wondering what it would take to earn the horse's trust. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of indigo, the ranch owner decided to try something different. They had been watching the child and the horse for weeks, taking careful note of every interaction, every subtle movement. And they had noticed something, a pattern, almost. The child never forced the horse to do anything. They didn't push, didn't pull, didn't demand. They just waited. And maybe that was the secret. Maybe the horse didn't need to be trained. Maybe it needed to be understood. So the ranch owner stepped into the corral, moving slowly, deliberately, with their hands at their sides. The horse's ears flicked toward them, its muscles tensing, but it didn't bolt. Not yet. The ranch owner stopped a few feet away, lowering themselves to the ground, and sat there, silent and still. They didn't speak, didn't move. They just sat, letting the cool evening air settle around them. At first, the horse didn't budge. It stood there, watching, waiting, its eyes locked on the figure sitting in the dirt. But as the minutes stretched into hours, something shifted. The tension in the horse's body began to ease, its ears swiveling back and forth as if it was starting to relax. And then, just as the ranch owner was beginning to think they had made a mistake, the horse took a step forward. Then another. And another. By the time the stars appeared in the night sky, the horse was standing just a few feet away, its breath warm and steady in the cool air. The ranch owner didn't reach out, didn't try to touch it. They just sat there, their heart pounding in their chest, and let the moment unfold. It wasn't much. Just a single step in a long, winding journey. But it was enough to remind the ranch owner why they had taken the horse in, why they had refused to give up, even when everyone else had. Because sometimes, the most difficult paths lead to the most extraordinary destinations. And though they didn't know it yet, this path was about to take a turn that would change everything. The nights grew colder as winter crept into the valley, and with it came a quiet tension that settled over the ranch like a thick fog. The horse, though still guarded, had begun to show glimmers of something no one could quite name. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was close. The ranch owner noticed it in the small things, the way its ears didn't pin back as sharply when someone approached, the way it lingered at the fence line as if considering whether to come closer. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the hope alive. The child, however, remained the only one who could truly reach the horse. Every day, after finishing their chores, they would slip into the corral and sit in their usual spot, knees tucked under their chin, watching the horse with a calm patience that seemed to defy their age. And every day, the horse would wander over, nudging their shoulder or resting its nose against their outstretched hand. It was a quiet ritual, one that seemed almost sacred, and the ranch hands began to speak of it in hushed tones, as if afraid that drawing too much attention to it might break the spell. But not everyone saw it that way. The ranch had been struggling for months, the weight of unpaid bills and a dwindling herd pressing down on the owner's shoulders like a storm cloud that wouldn't lift. The horse, with its unyielding defiance and slow progress, had become a point of contention among the staff. "We're wasting time," one of them said one evening, their voice low but edged with frustration. "That horse isn't worth it. We could sell it, get a few bucks, and focus on the ones we can actually train." The ranch owner didn't respond immediately. They stood at the window of the office, staring out at the corral where the horse stood, its dark silhouette illuminated by the soft glow of the barn lights. They wanted to argue, to say that the horse was worth it, that it just needed more time. But the truth was, they weren't sure anymore. The ranch couldn't survive on good intentions, and every day spent on the horse felt like another step closer to the edge of a cliff they couldn't afford to fall from. The conflict came to a head one crisp morning when a stranger arrived at the ranch. They pulled up in a sleek truck that gleamed in the sunlight, stepping out with the confident air of someone who knew exactly what they wanted. They introduced themselves as a buyer, someone who had heard about the horse and was willing to take it off the ranch's hands for a price, of course. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the ranch owner hesitate. The money could cover a few months' worth of feed, maybe even repair some of the fencing that had been left to weather and rot. But the idea of letting the horse go, of sending it away to an unknown future, made their stomach twist. The child overheard the conversation from where they stood by the barn, their small hands clenched into fists. They didn't understand the logistics of running a ranch, didn't know about the bills or the repairs or the endless list of problems that came with it. All they knew was that the horse didn't belong to anyone but itself, and the thought of it being sold like a piece of furniture made their chest ache. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, the child crept out to the corral, their breath clouding in the cold air. The horse was waiting for them, as if it had sensed their approach. It nudged their shoulder, and the child pressed their forehead against its warm neck, whispering softly. "They don't understand you," they said, their voice trembling. "But I do. I won't let them take you. I promise." The ranch owner found them the next morning, curled up in the hay beside the horse, fast asleep. For a moment, they just stood there, taking in the sight of the child's small form against the massive, unyielding presence of the horse. It was a picture of trust, of something pure and unspoken, and it made the ranch owner's chest tighten with a mix of guilt and determination. They couldn't sell the horse. Not yet. Not while there was still a chance, however small, that it could be saved. But the stranger didn't give up so easily. They returned the next day, this time with an offer that was hard to ignore. They spoke of how the horse could be trained by professionals, how it could have a purpose, a future, something more than the limbo it seemed to be stuck in now. The ranch owner listened, their expression carefully neutral, but the child, who had been watching from the shadows, felt their heart race with panic. They didn't trust the stranger, didn't like the way their eyes lingered on the horse as if it were a prize to be won. And they couldn't shake the feeling that if the horse left, it would lose something it could never get back. As the days passed, the tension on the ranch grew heavier, like a storm gathering strength. The ranch hands were divided, some arguing that selling the horse was the only logical choice, while others, inspired by the child's unwavering faith, insisted that it deserved another chance. The horse, oblivious to the debates, continued its quiet rituals with the child, its guarded spirit slowly softening in ways no one could explain. And then, one night, something happened that no one could have predicted. The child had gone to the corral as usual, sitting cross-legged in the grass while the horse grazed nearby. But as the minutes ticked by, a low, distant sound reached their ears, a rumble, faint at first but growing louder. The child stood, their heart pounding as the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. And then, over the hill, they saw it, a group of riders, their silhouettes dark against the moonlit sky, heading straight for the ranch. The child's first instinct was to run, but they hesitated, their gaze flicking to the horse. It had stopped grazing, its ears pinned back, its body tense and alert. For the first time, the child saw something in its eyes that they hadn't before: fear. And that fear was contagious. The child turned and sprinted toward the house, shouting for the ranch owner as the riders closed in. What followed was chaos, voices shouting, hooves pounding against the earth, the barn doors slamming open and shut. And through it all, the horse remained in the corral, its dark eyes scanning the scene with a mixture of confusion and wariness. The ranch hands, caught off guard, scrambled to figure out what was happening, but by the time they reached the corral, the riders were already retreating, disappearing into the night as quickly as they had come. When the dust settled, the ranch was left with more questions than answers. Who were the riders? What had they wanted? And why had the horse seemed to sense their arrival before anyone else? The child, still shaken, stayed close to the horse, their small hands gripping its mane as if it were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly shifted beneath their feet. The ranch owner, standing in the dim light of the barn, looked out at the corral with a heavy heart. The stranger's offer now felt like a lifeline, a way to escape the mounting pressure that threatened to crush them. But as they watched the child and the horse, something inside them whispered that the story wasn't over yet. There was more to this horse, more to its past, its pain, and its resilience. And if they let it go now, they might never know the truth. For now, though, the questions would have to wait. The riders were gone, but the tension they left behind remained, lingering in the air like smoke after a fire. And as the ranch settled into an uneasy silence, one thing was clear: whatever was coming next would test them all in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The days that followed were thick with tension, as though the whole ranch was holding its breath, waiting for something to snap. The strange riders were never seen again, but the unease they left behind lingered like a storm cloud overhead, darkening the skies and the hearts of everyone on the ranch. The horse, as though sensing the shift in the air, seemed more distant than before, its wary eyes never fully relaxing. The bond it had formed with the child remained, but there was a quiet, unspoken fear now, something more primal, more urgent, that made the air feel heavier each day. The ranch owner could feel the weight of it, too. Every time they stepped into the barn, every time they walked past the corral, it was as though the walls were closing in on them. The decision about the horse loomed over them, but now it wasn't just about the money, the bills, or the burden of the ranch. It was something deeper, something they couldn't explain. They couldn't shake the feeling that the horse had been meant for something else, something greater, but the world was closing in on it, trapping it in a place where it couldn't escape. And the child was caught in the middle of it, their innocent trust in the horse only making the situation more complicated. The child spent hours by the horse's side, their face drawn with concern. They tried to speak to the ranch owner, to plead for the horse's future, but each time, the words had been lost in the storm of conflicting thoughts. The ranch was sinking, and everyone knew it. If the horse couldn't be trained, if it couldn't be sold, then what was its future? What was their future? The ranch hands, their patience worn thin from the constant back and forth, began to grow restless. Their whispers, once hushed and uncertain, grew louder, more insistent. Some of them wanted to sell the horse outright, take whatever they could get for it, and move on. Others, those who had seen the horse's quiet moments with the child, weren't ready to give up just yet. They saw something in the animal, something the others didn't. But as the days passed and the pressure mounted, even they began to doubt. Was it worth it to keep holding on to a dream that might never come true? Then, one morning, the ranch owner received a call. It was from the stranger, the one who had first made the offer to buy the horse. The voice on the other end was smooth, calm, almost too calm, as if it was trying to hide something. "I've got another offer for you," the stranger said. "A much higher price. A serious buyer who knows what they're doing. We can get this over with quickly, make this horse's future secure. It'll be out of your hands. No more wondering, no more guessing. You'll be free." The words hung in the air like a noose. The ranch owner could feel the temptation gnawing at them, urging them to let go, to take the easy route. The bills, the repairs, the constant strain, it was all so overwhelming. But as they stood there in the barn, listening to the stranger's offer, their gaze shifted toward the corral. The horse was standing there, its body tense, eyes flicking back and forth as if it were waiting for something waiting for them, for some decision to be made. And the child was there, too, crouched in the grass, their fingers tracing the outline of the horse's hooves. They didn't see the ranch owner watching from the barn door, but the ranch owner saw them, saw the connection between the two, the silent understanding that had formed, and the weight of responsibility that the child carried. The ranch owner's heart pounded in their chest as the decision loomed before them. The pressure from the stranger was growing, the need for a resolution more urgent. But what if they were making a mistake? What if they were letting something precious slip away, something that could never be replaced? Meanwhile, the ranch hands, sensing the tension, were growing more vocal in their frustration. They didn't understand the hold the horse had over the ranch owner. To them, it was just another animal, just another problem to be dealt with. But to the ranch owner, and to the child, the horse represented something more. It was a symbol of something that couldn't be quantified, something intangible. It wasn't about the money, or the land, or the future of the ranch. It was about the belief that this horse, in its own way, had something to give, something that could change everything. But with each passing day, that belief was being tested. The ranch owner knew the stakes had never been higher. The child, too, was beginning to feel the weight of it all. They knew the horse couldn't stay where it was forever, that eventually, something would have to change. But they weren't ready to face the possibility that the horse's journey might end in someone else's hands. That their quiet friendship could be torn apart for the sake of money or convenience. And then, just when the tension seemed unbearable, the unexpected happened. The horse, who had grown increasingly restless in the past few days, suddenly broke through the corral fence. It was as though something inside it had snapped, some final breaking point reached, and in the blink of an eye, it was running. Running free, tearing through the open pasture, its hooves pounding against the earth with a power that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. The ranch owner and the child rushed to the corral, their hearts racing, but they were too late. The horse was already halfway across the field, its coat glistening in the morning light as it moved with a speed and grace no one had expected. It was a beautiful sight, and yet, as they watched it disappear into the distance, the feeling of loss hung in the air like a shadow, darkening everything it touched. The ranch hands were in a panic, scrambling to find a way to corral the animal, to catch it before it got too far. But the horse was swift, and for the first time since it had arrived at the ranch, it was fully in control of its own fate. It had broken free, not just from the physical constraints of the ranch, but from the expectations and pressures that had been placed on it. It was a wild thing again, free to choose its own path, and in that freedom, there was something both terrifying and magnificent. The child stood frozen in place, their gaze fixed on the horse, their heart torn between fear and hope. This was it, the moment of truth. The horse was leaving, but what would happen next? Would it return to them, or was this truly the end of their journey together? The ranch owner stood beside them, their expression unreadable, but in their eyes, there was a flicker of something else, a realization, perhaps, that they had underestimated what the horse was capable of. The horse had chosen its own fate, and now they had to decide if they were ready to follow. As the horse disappeared over the hill, the ranch fell silent. The tension, the uncertainty, all of it seemed to hang in the air, waiting for something, anything, to happen next. The question now was no longer whether the horse could be saved, but whether anyone else had the courage to follow it, and if they did, what they would find at the end of that uncertain road. The sound of the horse's hooves faded into the distance, leaving behind only the heavy silence of the ranch. The air seemed to thicken with uncertainty, as if the very earth was holding its breath. The child, still standing motionless, stared into the vastness of the field where the horse had disappeared. Every part of them wanted to run after it, to call it back, but something deep inside held them in place, rooted to the spot. The ranch owner stood beside them, their gaze distant, eyes focused on the horizon where the horse had gone. For a moment, nothing seemed real. It was as if time itself had frozen, the world reduced to the two of them, watching the empty space where a life had just made its escape. But that moment didn't last. The ranch owner turned abruptly, their face pale with a new realization, one that sent a chill through the child's spine. "Get the horses," the ranch owner said, their voice tight, almost a whisper. The child blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" "We can't just trust me," the ranch owner cut in, their voice cracking slightly. "There's no time to explain. We need to get the others." The child's heart began to race. They had seen the ranch owner agitated before, but this was different. The way they moved, the urgency in their actions, it was like they knew something that the child didn't, something that couldn't be ignored. Without another word, the child rushed to gather the horses, trying to piece together what was happening, but the strange sense of dread growing in their stomach made it hard to think clearly. As they led the horses out, something in the distance caught their eye. At first, it was a blur, just the shape of something moving quickly through the tall grass, but then it became unmistakable. More riders coming from the other side of the valley, their figures silhouetted against the setting sun. The child's pulse quickened. It was them, the same riders from before. But this time, they weren't just passing by. They were heading straight for the ranch, their horses kicking up dirt as they raced toward the corral. The child felt the world around them tilt, the air pressing in from all sides. Their first instinct was to run, to hide, but they knew there was nowhere to go. And besides, something was different about the way the riders moved. They weren't like ordinary ranchers or travelers. Their movements were too coordinated, too purposeful, like they were on a mission. And the way they looked, there was something about them that sent a shiver down the child's spine. The ranch owner was already on their horse, giving orders to the ranch hands in low, frantic tones. The child barely had time to mount their own horse before the riders were almost upon them, the sound of galloping hooves now deafening in the silence of the approaching night. There was a sudden shift in the air, and the child's heart skipped a beat as the lead rider raised their hand, signaling for the group to stop. The horses skidded to a halt, kicking up a cloud of dust. The riders dismounted with swift precision, each one moving with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. One of them, a man whose face was hidden by a dark mask, stepped forward. "We know what you've got here," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable threat. "And we're here to take it." The ranch owner's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're asking for." "Oh, we do," the man replied, his eyes flicking toward the child and the horses gathered in the corral. "That horse you've got, it's worth more than you could imagine. And we're willing to pay a fair price for it. A very fair price." The words hung in the air, each syllable making the child's blood run cold. It wasn't just a threat. It was a demand, a statement of intent. And as the man's eyes locked with theirs, the child felt a cold wave of understanding wash over them. They weren't here for a simple purchase. They were here for something far more sinister. The child turned toward the ranch owner, their heart racing. The ranch owner's face was pale, their hands clenched tightly on the reins of their horse. For a brief moment, they hesitated, their eyes flickering between the riders and the child. The child could see the internal struggle playing out in their eyes. They wanted to protect the horse, to protect the ranch, but the riders were not the kind of people who would back down easily. "We don't want trouble," the ranch owner said, their voice steady, but the child could hear the underlying panic. "You can have the horse." The man in the mask smiled, but it wasn't a smile that reassured anyone. "Then I guess we'll have to take it by force." At his signal, the riders moved in, circling the ranch like predators closing in on their prey. The child's stomach dropped. The ranch was about to become a battleground, and they weren't sure who was going to survive it. In that instant, everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. The ranch owner gave a sharp command, and the ranch hands rushed to action, trying to form a line, to protect the corral, to keep the horses from being taken. But the riders were too well organized, too experienced. They knew how to strike fast and with precision. As the first rider made a move toward the gate, the ranch owner urged the child to get out of the way. "You have to hide," they ordered, their voice shaking. "Go. Now." The child shook their head, refusing to leave the horse behind. They wouldn't let the ranch owner face this alone. But the danger was real now. The ranch was surrounded, the riders closing in from every direction. The child could feel the intensity of the moment, the air crackling with impending violence. The ranch hands fought bravely, but they were outmatched, outnumbered, and the situation was rapidly deteriorating. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, the sound of hooves thundered from behind them. Another group of riders appeared, this time on the opposite side of the field. The child's heart skipped a beat, unsure if they were friend or foe. But there was something different about this group. Their movements were purposeful, controlled, and as they approached, the child realized that they weren't here to fight. They were here to save the horse. The two groups of riders clashed in the middle of the field, a chaotic explosion of dust, hooves, and shouting. The child stood frozen, watching in disbelief as the ranch owner and the others fought with everything they had. But in the midst of the chaos, the truth began to reveal itself. This wasn't just about the horse anymore. There was something much larger at play. The horse wasn't just an animal to be sold or captured. It was the key to something much bigger, something that could change everything. But what exactly was it? And why did both groups want it so badly? As the battle raged on, the child's mind raced, trying to understand the true stakes. But there was no time for answers. Not yet. The final confrontation was just beginning, and the truth would be more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The battle in the field raged on, dust swirling in every direction, horses screaming, and riders shouting commands that were quickly lost in the chaos. The ranch hands fought valiantly, but the riders closing in from every side were a force to be reckoned with. The tension hung in the air like an electric charge, the world feeling as though it might explode at any second. The child's pulse hammered in their ears, watching helplessly as the ranch owner engaged with the masked man, both of them on horseback, locked in a fierce struggle. Everything around them felt like it was falling apart. The ranch, the animals, the people they cared about, all of it seemed to be slipping away. The horse, the one that had been at the center of this conflict, was nowhere to be seen, but the child knew it wasn't over yet. They couldn't leave it behind. And then, in a moment of silence that felt like an eternity, the sound of hooves galloping at full speed filled the air. The child turned in shock, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. The new riders, those who had arrived to protect the horse, were charging directly into the fray, breaking the clash in half. There were more of them now, at least a dozen, and they weren't alone. As the riders from the other side hesitated, trying to adjust to the sudden shift in momentum, a figure appeared at the edge of the field. The horse. The horse that had fled earlier, the one that had disappeared over the hills, was now returning. But it wasn't alone. At its side, leading it, was a woman. A woman dressed in simple, rugged clothes, her face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but the confidence in her posture, the way she handled the horse, it was undeniable. The horse slowed as it neared the group, and the child gasped, recognizing it instantly. This wasn't just any horse. This was the horse. Its coat had shifted from a deep chestnut to something lighter, almost golden in the sunlight. The transformation was subtle but profound, as if it had evolved into something more. The animal exuded an aura of power, strength, and wisdom, its presence alone silencing the chaos around it. The masked man, his eyes narrowing in recognition, spurred his horse forward, trying to cut them off. But the woman with the horse didn't flinch. She was unshaken, as if she knew exactly what was coming. The masked man barked an order to his group, and suddenly, the battle escalated once more. But before they could react, the woman spoke in a low, commanding voice. Enough. The word carried an undeniable weight. The riders froze, their eyes darting between her and the child, who had barely moved from their spot by the corral. They didn't understand what was happening. The woman raised her hand, and at the gesture, the horse stepped forward, its hooves creating a thunderous sound against the earth. "Take the horse if you dare," she said calmly, her gaze locked on the masked man. "But you will not leave here with it. You do not know what you are truly dealing with." The air seemed to grow heavier with her words. The child felt a surge of both fear and wonder. The horse stood proudly by the woman's side, its eyes glowing with an almost otherworldly intensity, and for the first time, the child understood what was happening. This wasn't just about a horse. This was about power, something far bigger than anything they had ever imagined. The masked man didn't respond at first. His eyes flickered to his riders, then to the woman, then back to the ranch owner, who stood there, equally stunned by the revelation. The child's mind raced. They didn't know exactly what the woman meant, but they could feel the weight of her words. There was something about the horse. Something incredible. And then, as if answering an unspoken question, the horse reared up on its hind legs. The air shifted. A crackling energy filled the space between them, a force so powerful that the riders backed away instinctively. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, as though the earth itself was alive, reacting to the presence of the horse. The masked man cursed under his breath, realizing too late that they had misjudged everything. "Get out of here," he spat, turning his horse sharply, signaling for the others to retreat. The remaining riders hesitated for a moment, but the palpable sense of power emanating from the horse and the woman was enough to send them scattering. In moments, the once feared group of riders was gone, fleeing into the distance, vanishing as quickly as they had arrived. The child stood there, frozen in awe. The woman slowly dismounted from the horse, her boots hitting the earth with a quiet thud. She turned to the ranch owner, who stood as if in a trance. The ranch owner looked at her with wide eyes, their face pale from shock and disbelief. "We're not just here to take the horse," the woman said softly, almost as if speaking to herself. "We're here to protect it. And you have no idea what it means." What it could mean? The ranch owner blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" The woman sighed, the weight of the moment heavy on her shoulders. "This horse. This creature you've tried to tame, it's not just any animal. It's a symbol, a key. A force that should never have been taken from its place. But now it's too late to go back. You've seen what it can do. And it's only the beginning." The child's heart pounded, struggling to keep up with the whirlwind of revelations. The ranch, the horse, the strange riders, they were all part of something far bigger than they had imagined. They had been part of a story that spanned far beyond the confines of the ranch, a story that now threatened to consume everything. The woman's gaze softened as she looked at the child. "You understand, don't you? This is your choice now. You have to decide whether you will help protect the horse or let it fall into the wrong hands." Before the child could respond, the ground shook once more, this time with a force that made them stumble. The horse, standing calmly at the woman's side, began to move again, its eyes glowing with an even brighter intensity. It wasn't the same creature they had seen before. It was something more. Something ancient. Something powerful. And as the night air grew colder, the child realized that the decision they made now would change everything. Not just for the ranch, but for the entire world. The night was still, but the air was charged with something electric, something ancient. The child's heart raced as they stood on the edge of the corral, watching the horse and the woman. The ranch hands had backed off, the battle over for now, but the tension in the air remained thick. The earth beneath them seemed to hum with life, as if it too was aware of the gravity of what had just transpired. The woman's words echoed in the child's mind, each syllable weighing heavily on their heart. The choice had always been there, even if they hadn't known it. Protect the horse, or let it fall into the wrong hands. But who were these riders? What was this force the woman spoke of? And why was the horse so important? The woman stepped closer, her boots crunching softly against the dirt as she approached the child. Her eyes were full of an intensity that made the child feel small, yet oddly powerful at the same time. There was a connection, a deep, unspoken understanding between them now. The child could feel it in their bones. You have a choice, the woman said again, her voice softer this time. But you must understand what that means. This horse, it is a guardian, an ancient protector of something far greater than this ranch, far greater than anything you could imagine. The forces that wanted it, they were not just after an animal. They were after control. They wanted to harness its power for their own purposes. And if they succeeded. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The weight of her words hung in the air, and the child felt it like a cold hand gripping their heart. The very existence of the world as they knew it was at stake. The horse, this creature that had seemed so ordinary at first, was something much, much more. The stakes were higher than they could have ever imagined. The ranch owner stepped forward, their face still pale but determined. What are we supposed to do now? They asked, their voice hoarse from the shouting and the adrenaline. How do we protect something like that? The woman glanced at the ranch owner, a fleeting look of sympathy crossing her features. You can't do it alone. None of you can. The child swallowed hard. Then who will help? The woman's lips curled into a knowing smile. You will. All of you will. She motioned for the horse to step forward, and it moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for an animal so large. It was as if the creature wasn't bound by the same laws as the others. It walked with purpose, its eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight, as if it had its own inner light, its own will. The child couldn't look away. You have the heart of a protector, the woman continued, her voice calm but firm. And that is why you are the one to stand beside this horse. It has chosen you. The child's mind raced, trying to comprehend the enormity of what was happening. Chosen? By the horse? It didn't make sense, but the way the animal moved toward them, the way it looked at them, it was undeniable. The connection was real. But what about them? The child asked, pointing to the riders who had retreated into the distance. What if they come back? What if others like them find us? The woman's gaze hardened, her hand resting lightly on the horse's mane. They will, she said. But you are not alone. We will gather others. There are more like us. More who know what this horse represents. And together, we will protect it. We will protect the world from what others might do with its power. The child felt a sense of resolve settling over them. It wasn't just about protecting a horse anymore. It was about protecting everything they knew and everything they had come to love. The ranch, the land, the people, all of it was part of something much bigger, something that had been set into motion long before they had ever set foot on this land. For a long moment, there was silence. The wind rustled the leaves of the nearby trees, and the horses, now calm, stood quietly in the corral. The moon hung high in the sky, its light illuminating the faces of those gathered, casting long shadows across the land. I don't know if I'm ready for this, the child said, their voice trembling. The woman smiled, a soft, reassuring smile that made the child feel like they weren't alone in the vastness of it all. You don't have to be ready, she said gently. You just have to be willing. The horse snorted, a sound that seemed almost amused, and the child couldn't help but chuckle softly. The tension in their chest eased just a little. Maybe they weren't ready. But they would be. They had no choice. There was no turning back now. The ranch owner, who had been quiet up until this point, stepped forward. We'll protect it, they said, their voice steady and filled with a newfound determination. All of us. We'll protect the horse. We'll protect the ranch. And we'll make sure that no one ever takes what doesn't belong to them. The woman nodded approvingly. That's all we can do. Fight for what's right. Fight for the things that truly matter. The child nodded, feeling a sense of unity rising within them. This wasn't just their fight. It was a fight for everyone who believed in something greater. It was a fight to preserve balance, to protect what couldn't be seen but was always felt: the earth, the animals, the spirit of the land. The woman mounted the horse again, her movements graceful and fluid. "Remember this," she said, looking down at the child. "This horse will always be with you, even if you don't always see it. It is a part of you now, just as you are a part of it." With that, she turned the horse and rode into the distance, her silhouette fading into the night. The child watched her go, a feeling of awe filling their chest. The ranch owner stood beside them, watching as well, a quiet understanding passing between them. The fight was far from over. There would be more battles, more challenges, but the child knew now that they weren't alone. They had the power to fight back, the power to protect what mattered most. They had found their purpose. As the moonlight bathed the ranch in a soft glow, the child took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world settle on their shoulders. But it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a responsibility they were ready to carry. The wind rustled the trees once more, and the distant sound of hooves echoed softly in the night, a reminder that the journey was just beginning. The child turned back toward the ranch, their heart filled with a new sense of purpose. Whatever came next, they would face it head on. They had to. And in that moment, they knew that the horse had not just been a symbol. It had been the key to everything they were, and everything they would become. As the stars twinkled above them, the child made a silent vow. They would never let go. They would fight for the ranch, for the horse, and for the future of the land they loved. The world was changing, and they would be ready for it.